My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It can be hard to get your head around all the ways the federal government's frenzy of executive orders, tariffs, and funding cuts are affecting daily life here in Oregon. That's why our ears perked up when we heard about the Portland Business Journal's latest project. They collected stories of how these policies are touching people in every one of Oregon's 36 counties. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking to Portland Business Journal editor Suzanne Stevens about what her team learned through speaking with residents from every corner of Oregon, spanning from our coast and urban centers to our most rural areas. It's Monday, May 12th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Is this the first statewide reporting project the Portland Business Journal has tackled?
You know, now that I think about it, it probably is the first statewide project that we've done. We do a lot of newsroom projects together. We like to do those kind of team projects. And we did some during COVID where we definitely got out of talking to small businesses outside the Portland metro. But we didn't often go as far out into some of the more rural communities, Eastern Oregon, deep Southern Oregon. So, yeah, I think actually this is the first time we've really intentionally reached out to folks across the state.
Yeah, well, what inspired the ambitious scope?
Yeah, so, you know, the way it came together, actually, one of my colleagues and I, Elizabeth Hayes, were having a reporter meeting, and we were just kind of talking about the last couple of months. This was probably in late February, early March. And we were just talking about, you know, we'd been attending town hall meetings, hearing from federal workers, and we'd interviewed, of course, CEOs and executives across most of our beats. We talked to manufacturers and restaurant operators and whiskey makers and winemakers and importers just to try to get a grasp on the impact of kind of shifting federal policies. And some businesses, you know, saw it obviously as a huge threat. A few saw it as a way to kind of position their businesses to benefit. We also covered all the lawsuits that were being filed by the Oregon Attorney General, Dan Rayfield, that were trying to block these actions. So as Liz and I were talking, it kind of became clear that this was rapidly morphing into an economic environment that was really going to touch every corner of the state. So I think Liz actually had the idea. She's like, oh, you know, Oregon has 36 counties. Why don't we tell 36 stories? And that's kind of what we set out to do.
Wow. Well, let's go through some of the stories that your team gathered. But let's start at home. For Multnomah County, you focused on Steelport Knife Company. It's a small knife manufacturer. Now, what was interesting about the issues they were facing?
Well, you know, we have talked to Ron Cormay, the CEO over at Steelport Knife Company, for years. And he has this company that has really gained traction internationally, which is tough for a knife company. I mean, even in places like Japan, where they maybe have their own kind of, you know, industry going. And so he has a big export business as part of Steelport. And these are professional knives. They're, you know, really expensive. I don't think you or I would ever buy one. They are for chef quality, or really folks who kind of view themselves in that world. So we talked to him in probably late February, and he had just put in an order, and his steel supplier at that point had already increased the price by 10%. On the materials that Ron needed for his business. So that kind of forced Ron to readjust his business model to concentrate a little bit more on domestic sales. He also told us he had a Canadian customer that just flat out canceled an order just out of frustration with what was happening in the U.S. So Ron told us, you know, that he feels the city of Portland really is supportive to small businesses, but it's still been a real challenge. And so for him, it's just kind of been ongoing conversations, trying to maintain those supply chains and also maintain customers. You know, frankly, for a company like Steelport that's not huge, every customer is super important.
Where are their customers living? Like, do they know who's buying their knives?
I mean, I think they sell all over the world. Obviously, they have customers in Canada, they have customers in Europe and overseas. So they're one of those Oregon made brands that Oregon made label helps a company. You know, people see that as, you know, well made, good stuff. They like to say it's Oregon made, kind of like Oregon wine. So he has customers, you know, all over the place, including in the US. So he is trying to pivot now because he feels like he has to really focus a little bit more on domestic sales. Whereas I think he was starting to really look at the broader scope of the world.
Man, I can only imagine how frustrating that is for a small business that's ready to expand globally. You know, I also appreciated in the series how you branched out from just telling traditional business stories. For example, in Clatsop County on the Oregon coast, you shared a story about the challenges Astoria Columbia Memorial Hospital is facing because of changes to FEMA. Now, what's going on there?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. So Elizabeth, who I mentioned earlier, actually covers healthcare for us. And we knew that the healthcare industry has already been struggling, right? Margins are super thin. Now there's potential cuts to Medicaid. There's so many challenges. So we really knew that we wanted to make sure that we got some hospital executives in there, because if you're looking at the statewide economy too, healthcare and hospitals in a lot of communities are the largest employer. So if there are struggles there, that really ripples through the community, not just in terms of the access to care, but also in terms of just the health economically of that county. So Astoria's Columbia Memorial Hospital, they'd received a $20 million FEMA grant in 2023. And the plan was that money was already going toward a $250 million project that was trying to gird the facility really to withstand an earthquake or a tsunami. And that would allow for ongoing care in the case of any kind of emergency. And this facility would also serve as the North Coast only vertical evacuation shelter where patients could continue to get care, but also someplace that could provide a refuge for up to 1,900 people if there was a tragedy and people needed a place to go. So really important facility and a really important location, I think, in Oregon. It's interesting. The original grant actually came from the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. It's called the BRIC program. A lot of folks have probably heard about that. And that was actually signed into law by President Trump in 2018. So this was a program that he supported and signed into law. Well, FEMA recently canceled all BRIC grants, even for projects that are already underway.
What?
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
It's
no.
nuts.
That's awful. That just feels like borderline illegal, you know, where you're just like, that you can't do that.
Some people would say it is illegal. And I think there are legal challenges all over the place related to that. And our attorney general is super active in that, leading some cases. And actually, Senator Jeff Merkley came out and actually we have a quote from him just talking about how awful and dangerous it is to take that money away when it's already in process and it's already been granted.
Well, how far along were they in the process?
Well, they got the grant in 2023, and the overall project's $250 million. So this was a $20 million grant. So absolutely significant for sure. So I think the hope is that some of that money will be restored. The project's moving forward because it's underway. I'm just not sure how far along.
Right. And this is the kind of infrastructure that government money should be paying for. And not only that, this isn't like, oh, wouldn't it be nice? Because it's not if, it's a when we're speaking about this type of disaster. And it's been already predicted that the coast will, of course, be hit the hardest. They're the furthest away from any kind of medical facilities, any kind of first responders. Like they're lacking in so much. So this is just, wow, like this is gutting. You know,
it's hard. It's really a challenge. And we don't think of the coast as being isolated necessarily. But if there is.
It is. There's a forest in between.
Yes.
You know, it's like drive out to the coast at night. Yes. It's isolated.
And if there's an earthquake, if there's, you know, all the things, like you said, it's not if, it's when. And that isolation becomes even worse. So if we don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with that, a lot of people could suffer.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we return, more stories from the coast. Are you ready to vote in the May 20th special election? You'll be deciding on bonds to improve safety and update facilities at Portland Public Schools and Mount Hood Community College. You'll also be choosing directors to serve on local school boards, fire and water district boards, and the Urban Flood and Water Safety Board. And as we all know, who heads these boards is important. But if you're still deciding, the League of Women Voters is an excellent resource. Visit vote411.org and lwvpdx.org, where they have ballot measure explanations, candidate info, video interviews, and for the most contested races, there are actually recordings in which candidates or advocates debate the issues. Your vote is your voice. Make it count. Visit vote411.org and LWVPDX to inform your vote.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast. We've all set health goals: lose weight, exercise more, eat better. But without a plan, those goals often fade. That may have happened to you. It has definitely happened to me. And that's where Prolon comes in. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet gives you a science-backed, structured approach to stay on track and see real results. And now Prolon is upping their game with the new Next-Gen 5-day program, delivering the same science-backed benefits in a cleaner, more convenient, and more flavorful format. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program featuring soups, snacks, and beverages designed to nourish the body while keeping it in a fasting state, triggering cellular rejuvenation and renewal. Next-Gen builds on the original Prolon with 100% organic soups and teas, a richer taste, and ready-to-eat meals. Developed over decades at USC's Longevity Institute and backed by top U.S. medical centers, Prolon has been shown to support biological age reduction, metabolic health, skin appearance, fat loss, and energy. I've been doing the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. I really enjoy the tasty energy bars, the snacks and soups, and the fact that I can enjoy meals, even though the calorie count is super low. The flavors and textures are excellent. An olive oil snack here, broccoli and quinoa soup there, hibiscus tea, a yummy nut bar. It's got the benefits of a 5-day fast, but doesn't have the challenge of doing it with pure liquids. It's a system reset. And also, I know this sounds funny, but it's not. The packaging and directions are fantastic, clear, and well organized and thoughtful. For a limited time, you can be first in line to experience the new Next-Gen at special savings. Prolon is offering CityCast listeners 15% off site-wide, plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe to their 5-day program. Just visit prolonlife.com/city. That's PROLONLIFE.com/city to claim your 15% discount and your bonus gift. prolonlife.com/city. This episode of CityCast is sponsored by Babbel. Learning a new language opens the door to new friends, new cultures, maybe even a whole new life. So why not start the journey today with Babbel? You can start speaking a new language with confidence thanks to Babbel's conversation-based technique. It quickly teaches you useful words and phrases about the things you actually talk about in the real world. There are more than a dozen languages available for you to learn at your own pace, with material tailored to your individual proficiency level, interests, and time availability. I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel and brushing up a teeny bit on my French. But there's also Turkish, Swedish, Dutch, German, many more languages. Babbel's tips and tools for learning a new language are approachable and accessible. It's like having a private tutor in your pocket. I particularly love Babbel's guided conversations, which let me practice real-world conversations. What to say at the doctor's office, how to leave a party, using speech recognition to make sure I'm getting the pronunciation right. Babbel's mobile app and website have real-time feedback, progress trackers, and clear visualizations. They're helping me improve my Spanish in only 10 minutes a day. So get talking with Babbel. I want you to learn another language, so I'm teaming up with Babbel to gift you 55% off subscriptions, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 55% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Babbel.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, also on the coast in Lincoln County, you talked with the head of a group that represents commercial fishing vessels. Now, what unexpected consequences are they facing because of federal government funding cuts? Which when I heard that, I was like, how are they funded, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So this was a really interesting one. I did actually do the reporting on this one, and I've just kind of had a lifelong fascination with fishing, and I love boats. I love being out on the water and the big cargo ships. And so I was really excited to connect with Heather Mann, and she has been executive director of a group called the Midwater Trawlers Cooperative, MTC, on the coast. Newport is the largest or the second largest kind of home port for fishing vessels in Oregon. If anybody who's been to Newport has been down there and kind of seen it, super important to that economy. The Trawlers Cooperative represents 33 commercial fishing vessels. Most of them are ported in Newport and are owned by multi-generational fishing families. So the roots really do run deep. So Heather said her members certainly are open to review of any regulations that they believe, could be inhibiting the industry's growth or maybe result in a lot of red tape. So she was very upfront saying, look, there are things that could come out of this administration that my members would be interested to hear and at least consider. So they're open to some kind of review, and maybe there are some policy shifts where they might see some benefit. However, overall, though, she said, tariffs are a huge issue on the coast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, a lot of fish that these fishing families catch are exported. And these tariffs come at a time when there are already really, really difficult challenges for the industry. Ukraine, for instance, is historically one of the biggest buyers of Pacific whiting, which there's a whole season of Pacific whiting that these fishing vessels go out for. And I think it'd be starting soon. So that entire market has evaporated. Now with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports, that just kind of piles on. But what I found really interesting, I kind of went in thinking our discussion was going to be about tariffs because I knew that, exporting was a big part of the revenue generation for these businesses. But beyond that, what Heather said she's most concerned about is the potential defunding of NOAA. The numbers that have been thrown out is about $1 billion. So NOAA is where the National Marine Fisheries Service is housed. That's called NMFS. And it conducts surveys of fish populations. And then that information allows fisheries managers to then determine how much of a particular fish can be harvested. So this is about sustainability. This is about making sure that we don't overfish, which these families do not want that. They're very much in favor of these surveys. These fish surveys are based on fishing vessels, that go out and provide information, but also the science, going out and actually conducting surveys. And that's what the National Marine Fisheries Service has really focused on. And we're right at the point when these fishing harvests are being determined. So what Heather said is that they've already seen surveys that, in her words, have been eroded or canceled altogether. They've seen employees at NMFS that have lost their jobs. And these are employers that are important to even getting the regulatory process done to open the fisheries. The fisheries legally cannot open without these surveys.
I was about to ask, I was like, are they going to just go rogue and then eventually screw themselves down the line? But they can't even physically open their season. Wow.
If they're following the law, which most of us try to follow the law.
But see, this is what happens with laws that really deter a person from creating a livelihood. This is how we get a black market.
Yeah.
And then once you create a black market, then regulations are out. There's so much more risk for everyone involved. So I don't know, this feels to me already just like, oh man, the storyteller in me wants to see this. I'm like, I can't wait to, hear the black market of 2025, on the Oregon coast. But the other part of me is just like, oh no, this is not good,
No, and these are not fishing vessels that are going to go out without the harvest determined. This is how the industry works. And these families deeply support it. I mean, without those surveys, without sustainable harvesting, their business is going to be devastated, or they're kind of out there. They don't know, without that kind of data. So this is a really tough one. I will say, Heather, when I talked to her, this was maybe 3 weeks ago, she was going to testify in DC. So I'm curious to circle back with her and we will report on kind of how that went. And, the hope is some of this funding is going to be restored, but that hope is spread so thin across so many stories and so many industries that it's hard to really get your head around.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the reporting, as we've been discussing, dealt with people being negatively affected by action the federal government has taken, either it be tariffs or Trump's executive orders or all the cuts in funding. Did you find anyone who was feeling optimistic? And also, like, what what is the optimism?
We did find some people, and I just want to be really upfront that we didn't set out with an agenda at all. We had been, of course, doing stories like everybody had for months. And most of it was concern, uncertainty, chaos, fear, anxiety, because that's just the environment we were living in. So when we envisioned this project as a newsroom, all of us, we were very clear as a group that, we go in open-minded. We really want to hear what people think. That's what this project was about, So we did find people who were optimistic. Wallowa County, which is out, farthest, northeastern part of Oregon. Joseph is out there, Wallowa Lake. So a lot of folks, tourism is big out there, but certainly farming and ranching. So we talked to two family ranchers, Adele Nash, whose family, Six Ranch, has been in Wallowa County since 1884. So talk about deep roots in Oregon. I just love that kind of stuff. Well, cattle prices are soaring, so they've been leaning a little bit more into tourism. And she taps federal conservation grants that have allowed the family to restore land along the Wallowa River for fly fishing. But there's uncertainty now about that grant funding. So, she told us that's just really added to her challenges. So that's one side of the story. We also talked to another tourism family in Wallowa County, a woman named Shirley Cox, and she co-owns a company called Del Sol Wilderness Adventures. And they take people out into the wilderness, which also sounds very cool to me, in Wallowa County. And I think sets them up with like camping. And so it's kind of like, we'll get you all set up and then leave you here and you can feel like you've
like you did it all by yourself.
Hey, I'm here. I got this. It sounds like a fantastic business model. But she said enthusiasm for federal spending cuts and tariffs is strong in Wallowa County. She said a lot of folks are, in her words, embracing it. And she said it's not just her. She said the whole county is optimistic about federal funding cuts. So that was an interesting dynamic there. A little bit more relatable, I think, on the business side. We talked to a guy in Coos County. His name is Chuck Toombs. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Oregon Seaweed. He sees a lot of opportunity in the kind of turmoil over tariffs and agriculture subsidies. So his company makes Pacific Dulce seaweed at 2 coastal farms in Oregon. Each farm has about 30 tanks. So plant-based food is obviously growing in popularity. This is good for his business. So he has a plan, a pilot project in Coos Bay, where if he can make it happen, he'd have 3,000 tanks and employ hundreds of people to serve that kind of plant-based food market. And right now, most of that supply comes from Asia. And so, of course, he's thinking, if I can, supply,
get in there.
I can get in there. So there is definitely a business opportunity. We also heard from an Oregon wine operator who said the same thing, that 200% tariffs were thrown out there, and that would just devastate import. It would force closure of many wine companies that do importing, that specialize in importing. But, another guy, he said he doesn't support kind of the madness that's happening right now. But he said, look, if it's harder to import wine, we have amazing Oregon wine here. And sales are slumping across the industry right now, across the nation. And wine sales are way down, including in Oregon. This could be a real opportunity. So it does go both ways. Most of the people are just, I think the anxiety is so high and uncertainty, it's hard to think beyond that about opportunity. But we have seen some optimism.
Gotcha. Yeah, the 2 concrete examples you gave me of business opportunity, that makes sense, like as to why they are seeing it as a possible boon. But the other of just being like stoked about federal spending just as an idealistic view, that I don't quite understand yet, because I'm not seeing what they're seeing come down the pipeline that is benefiting them, aside from like sticking it to the government,
Yeah, I mean,
I'm wondering if you saw anything on the more rural side that they were just like, yes, our chicken feed is number 1 now.
Yeah, we didn't have really concrete examples. I think there are obviously big issues and deep-seated issues around land use and federal land in Oregon and environmental regulations in Oregon, particularly in a lot of rural areas where, people feel like they can't manage their own land the way they want to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
They would argue, like the fisheries families, that, look, we are into sustainability like everybody else. We don't want to devastate our land. But a lot of the kind of rules and regulations that are piled on can make it really difficult for them to do business. We actually talked to a gentleman in deep southern Oregon, a rancher, and he was very frustrated with his efforts to restore his land after wildfires because he said he kept running into bureaucracy at the state that wouldn't allow him to do the work that he felt needed to be done to keep the water safe from runoff. So he was really like, look, these barriers need to be knocked down. He was talking specifically about the state. In the same interview, though, he talked about he has federal grants that are now paused also. So there's conflict, and I think people are conflicted about it. But I think some of that, this is a good thing, really runs deep because of longstanding issues. It's not just I'm pro-Trump.
No, it's I'm anti-government.
It goes deeper.
Yeah, it makes sense because, we've also discussed it on the show, that divide between the rural and the more urban areas and how it feels a lot like state government works for urban areas and not so much for the rural areas.
Right.
And there's a reason for that, and it really is proximity. It's lack of knowledge. It's so much that goes on that, if someone were to explain, well, this is why this doesn't work, it's just like, oh, well, we didn't know that. So we passed a law.
Right,
You know
right,
what I mean?
exactly.
It's just, it doesn't make any sense. So I get that frustration. But I was just wondering if they were seeing, because I think that to me, those would be the Oregonians that would be most conflicted because they would have this idealistic vision of like less government, good, and then have their funding cut and then just be like,
It is where the biggest, I think, where we were hearing both sides of the issue sometime from the same person. I mean, exports of Oregon ag are, could be devastating. And those are markets that were just coming back from tariffs in 2018 the first Trump administration. So farmers, ranchers who have long wished for a better kind of understanding of their world by the government and kind of the challenges that they face are now really feeling the hit.
Yeah. Well, Suzanne, it was a really fun read to go through. And I mean fun, not like hooray, but I just love learning about our state, even if it's through this lens of anxiety and desperation. There were just, to hit every county and to also get that visual of like, oh, this county is known for this, or this county, this is their main business or industry. It was interesting to see the state that way. I highly recommend people check it out. You will have a stomachache at the end of it, but it's a really fascinating read.
I appreciate hearing that. It was really fun to edit. When I edited and I ran through, and we should say, I'd love folks to know that these are 100-word snapshots. These are not 36 fully reported out stories. It is very digestible. You can read through it in one sitting. And it was so enlightening for me as well, Claudia, the kind of hearing the stories of individuals, hearing their voices was really great. So I appreciate the shout out.
Well, thanks again for being here, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Enjoyed our time together.
Same here. Thanks a lot.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend, rate or leave us a review. It really does help us out. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.